or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Patricia, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 2nd issue of the Am-Pol Eagle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Starting with an article on the front page of the Eagle, Nowak's murder stirs outrage in England. The murder of Henry Nowak in Southampton has sparked a debate in Britain's Parliament about policing in the United Kingdom, with allegations of a two-tier policing system there. The incident also sparked calls led by Nowak's family for a review of knife laws and the legal exemptions which allow Sikhs to carry ceremonial knives in that country. This June, Vikram Digwa, 23, was convicted of murdering Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old student at the University of Southampton who had Polish and UK citizenship, on December 3, 2025. Digwa was sentenced for life with a minimum term of 21 years. While walking home on Belmont Road after a night out with friends, Nowak, who was unarmed, came upon Digwa, who was carrying a knife in a sheath, as well as a second, larger dagger linked to his tradition as a member of the Nihang Order of Sikhs. Nowak appeared to notice the larger blade and began filming Digwa on his phone. Nowak asked Digwa if he was a bad man, to which Digwa replied, "I am a bad man." Digwa took Nowak's phone, and the judge at trial said Digwa deliberately stabbed Nowak, who suffered 4 stab wounds, including a fatal injury to the chest. The judge also said Digwa filmed Nowak as he suffered following the stabbing. Later, Digwa's brother would call police and lie, saying Vikram was racially attacked. Police came and handcuffed Nowak, who said he had been stabbed and could not breathe. Police body cam footage shows Nowak telling officers 4 times, "I've been stabbed." While he's being handcuffed and placed under arrest, one officer said, "I don't think you have, mate." Nowak's phone was discovered in Digwa's pocket. During the trial, video from the phone was played to jurors, and Nowak can be heard saying, "Hello, car," and singing to himself before yawning, with the footage then cutting to show Digwa walking away from him. The judge at the sentencing said Nowak's injuries were so severe he would not have survived no matter how fast he received treatment. And following up on that article, there was a letter in the editorial section, "Justice for Henry Nowak." The death of Henry Nowak should force Britain to confront 2 uncomfortable truths at once. The first is that an innocent young man lost his life in a senseless act of violence. The second is that authorities charged with protecting him appeared, in those critical first moments, to reach conclusions before establishing the facts. Body-worn camera footage released before the trial has shocked the public for good reason. It shows Henry repeatedly telling officers that he had been stabbed, only for those pleas to be dismissed while he was handcuffed and treated as a suspect. Officers did not discover his wound for several minutes, despite his repeated attempts to explain what had happened. The issue is not simply that officers made a mistake. Police officers often have to make split-second judgments in chaotic situations. The concern is that the available evidence suggests those judgments may have hardened into certainty far too quickly. The alleged attacker falsely claimed to be a victim of a racist assault, and that account appears to have shaped the officer's immediate response. Only later did the reality emerge. Henry Nowak was the victim, and the man accusing him had committed the murder. That sequence of events inevitably damaged public confidence. Trust in policing depends not on perfection, but on fairness, impartiality, and a willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads. When the first instinct appears to be to believe one account over another without adequate verification, confidence is eroded. The protests that followed reflected genuine public anger. Many people gathered peacefully to demand accountability and answers. They were entitled to do so. A democratic society depends upon the ability of citizens to challenge public institutions when serious questions arise. Unfortunately, some demonstrations descended into violence. Police officers were injured, property was damaged, and extremist figures sought to turn a tragedy into a political rallying cry. That served neither Henry's memory nor the search for justice. Indeed, Henry's own family publicly appealed for his death not to become a vehicle for hatred or division. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is now investigating the police response. That inquiry must be thorough, transparent, and independent. If mistakes were made, they should be acknowledged honestly and lessons implemented so that no family experiences a similar tragedy. Henry Nowak's death was first and foremost the result of a murderer who has since been convicted. But the public is also entitled to ask whether a young man desperately asking for help should ever have been treated as a suspect before being treated as a victim. That question deserves answers, not slogans, not riots, and not political point scoring, but facts, accountability, and justice. And we'll continue with the editorial section of the July 2nd Am-Pol Eagle. Let freedom ring. As the United States marks the 250th anniversary of its Declaration of Independence, Americans have every reason to celebrate the resilience of a nation founded on the revolutionary ideals of liberty, self-government, and the inalienable rights of all people. Yet this milestone is more than a commemoration of the past. It is also an invitation to recognize the international friendships that helped make the American experiment possible. Few countries share a deeper historical connection with America's quest for freedom than Poland. The story begins during the American Revolution when two remarkable Polish patriots crossed the Atlantic to support a cause that was not their own, but one they recognized as universal. Kosciuszko, a gifted military engineer, designed and strengthened fortifications that proved decisive in key American victories, including the defenses at West Point. Kazimierz Pulaski, remembered as the father of the American cavalry, gave his life at the Battle of Savannah while fighting for American independence. Their sacrifices reflected a profound belief that liberty knows no borders. And there are others, including Chaim Salomon, a Jewish-Polish immigrant, financier, and patriot, who raised and managed money for the revolutionary cause, helping to sustain an army and a government. Their legacy represents the best of international solidarity, a recognition that the defense of freedom is a shared responsibility. The bond between the United States and Poland did not end with the Revolutionary War. In the centuries that followed, both nations experienced triumphs and tragedies while remaining committed to the principle that people have the right to determine their own future. Poland's own history became a testament to extraordinary resilience. Despite partitions, foreign occupation, and decades behind the Iron Curtain, the Polish people never abandoned their aspirations for independence and democracy. The American people watched with admiration as the Solidarity movement challenged communist rule in the 1980s, demonstrating once again that peaceful determination could overcome oppression. America's support for democratic movements in Eastern Europe reflected values that had united the two nations since the 18th century. When Poland regained its full sovereignty it reaffirmed partnership built not simply on diplomacy, but on shared ideals. Today, the United States and Poland stand together as allies. Their cooperation extends beyond military alliances to education, scientific research, cultural exchange, and economic development. Our readers are among the millions of Americans proudly tracing their ancestry to Poland, enriching the nation's cultural fabric while strengthening ties between the two countries. As America celebrates 250 years of independence, it should remember that freedom is never achieved in isolation. It is strengthened by partnerships, sustained through sacrifice, and preserved by each new generation. The anniversary is therefore not only a celebration of America's founding, but also a tribute to the enduring friendship between two nations whose histories have been shaped by the same enduring aspiration, that all people deserve the right to live in freedom, govern themselves, and pass those blessings to the future generations. Continuing with the front page of the July 2nd Am-Pol Eagle. Polish news bites. Record heat wave sweeps across Poland. Poland endured one of the hottest weeks on record as an intense European heat wave pushed temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius in several western regions. Meteorologists reported that the long-standing national temperature record was broken in Ślubsy, while authorities issued warnings about wildfires, dehydration, and pressure on energy infrastructure. Emergency services urged residents to avoid strenuous outdoor activity during the hottest parts of the day and to check on elderly neighbors and vulnerable families members. Firefighters responded to numerous grass and forest fires as dry conditions combined with high winds to increase fire risks across western and central Poland. The extreme weather formed part of a broader heat wave affecting much of Europe. Local governments established cooling stations and encouraged people to remain hydrated while monitoring electricity demand as air conditioning use surged. In Poland, multiple cities set up water curtains to help residents keep cool in the heat. Agricultural organizations also expressed concern about crop damage caused by prolonged heat and limited rainfall. Farmers warned that continued high temperatures could reduce harvests and place additional pressure on food production later this year. Weather forecasters expect temperatures to moderate somewhat in the coming days, although the thunderstorms may accompany the cooler air. Political tensions grow over Ukraine's EU membership. Domestic political divisions over Ukraine's future relationship with the European Union intensified in Poland this week. Opposition leader Jaroslaw Kaczynski called for Poland to block Ukraine's accession process following renewed disputes over historical issues involving the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA. The controversy centers on Ukrainian decisions honoring military formations associated with the UPA, whose action during World War II remained deeply controversial in Poland because of massacres of Polish civilians. The disagreement has complicated relations between the neighboring countries. Prime Minister Donald Tusk's government continues to support Ukraine militarily and economically, while seeking to manage growing domestic criticism. Political and analysts note that historical memory remains a powerful force in Polish politics, particularly as opposition parties seek to capitalize on public concerns regarding Ukrainian refugees, agricultural imports, and EU enlargement. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Am-Pol Eagle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing with the Am-Pol Eagle for July 2nd from the front page. Eye-Opening Trip to Poland by Tom Terapaki, Tom Talk column, Part 1. My most recent visit to Poland really opened my eyes about the scope and diversity of that country, as well as providing me the opportunity to visit the locations where many of my ancestors lived. The trip to northern Poland was organized by Polish-American radio program host Andy Golobiowski and Wanda Gryzik of Chopin Tours. The cities we visited included Warsaw, Gdansk, Turin, and Poznan, and it included such sites as the immense Malbork Castle and the beautiful Gniezno Cathedral. It would be hard for me to cover every aspect of the trip unless I did a 52-week series. Plus, I've already written extensively about traveling to Poland, so I decided to focus on a couple of aspects of my recent trip. Let me start with one of the many things that connect many Polish Americans to their heritage, food. In Poland, pierogi are everywhere, but other traditional dishes can be harder to find. My last time in that country, I went on a fruitless search for czernina. Well, there are a number of places in the Buffalo area where I can eat duck soup. I couldn't find any in cities like Warsaw and Krakow. In Poland, it's called czernina, or sometimes czernina polikwa, depending on the region. It's a hearty soup famous for its distinct sweet and sour flavor, its brown, chocolate-like color, and the fact that it was traditionally made from duck's blood. Many people don't like it either because of its unique taste or because of the duck's blood. In my family, however, it's a big favorite, and I was delighted to find it when I went to the north of Poland. I first found some czernica in Gdansk. Some of my fellow travelers knew about a place called Restaurantsa Polipietro, my apologies for the pronunciation, a cozy eatery located near the town square. The soup was fantastic, filled with duck, meat, and vegetables. Then in Poznan, I had czernina at the Bamberka restaurant in the area of Poznan Old Market Square. It was different from the one in Gdansk, but still very good, with tasty kluski. As I found out, czernina is not uncommon, especially in northern Poland, but you have to know where to look for it. When I was traveling around my ancestral villages, more about that later, we stopped at Chadawiska in Maglino, an authentic roadside tavern that serves traditional favorites. I enjoyed more excellent czernina as well as potato pancakes served in large portions. Interestingly, the restaurant had 3 life-size bison outside that reminded me of the Heard About Buffalo art project a few years ago back home. You may know that Poland is home to the world's largest population of European bison, known as zebra. Many in Buffalo's Polonia come from the area around Poznan, as did my ancestors. Maybe they brought their love of czernina with them, and that's why it's so popular in Western New York. Polish Your Kitchen. In Zeznan, our group had dinner with Anna and Mark Herning. Anna is well known for Polish Your Kitchen, a cooking blog and YouTube show. She and Mark, her American-born husband, hosted us for dinner at Wisnik Brewery, located in the Gothic vaults of the cellar of the old town hall. The dinner was not only delicious, but included a tasting of traditionally brewed artisan beers. I was impressed. Every meal in Poland started with soup, some of which are hard to find in Buffalo. In particular, Zurek, a hearty, rich soup made with fermented rye, was available just about everywhere. I also had the chance to try cold beet soup, which was surprisingly good. Overall, the restaurants were outstanding and inexpensive as well. In Szczecin, I had the best liver and onions with apples ever. I love a strong cup of coffee, and the coffee everywhere in Poland was excellent as well. I also got the chance to visit a milk bar in Warsaw, one of the few holdovers from the communist era. Milk bars offer traditional, no-frills Polish food like pierogi at inexpensive prices. It was cafeteria style and no frills, but it certainly lived up to its reputation. There seemed to be more McDonald's restaurants than I saw on my previous trip, but mostly on the highways as we drove between cities. For fast food or street food, it seems the Poles favor kebabs. Believed to be Turkish in origin, they typically feature chicken or beef carved from a vertical rotisserie and stuffed into a pita with vegetables and sauces. In Torun, I tried zapiekanki, another popular Polish street food. Some call it Polish pizza. It's basically French bread, topped with sautéed mushrooms and sometimes ham, melted cheese, and ketchup. There are a number of variations as well. It's a simple dish, but surprisingly good. In Poznan, I tried the famous St. Martin's croissant, which is filled with a mixture of white poppy seeds, nuts, raisins, and candied fruits, and topped with icing and nuts. It's taken so seriously that it's a protected geographical indication, or PGI, product, meaning only certified bakeries in the greater Poland region can legally produce it. I found it very sweet and filling, not something I'd eat every day. In Torun, I sampled many varieties of Poland's gingerbread. Pierniki, the famous ginger spice cookies made there for over 700 years. If you like gingerbread, you'll love them. Chocolate pierogi. At the Radio Cafe in Warsaw, I ate a traditional klobaki that was awesome. My group also had an interesting conversation with the owner, Stanislaw Przinski, a journalist who worked for Radio Free Europe. The comfortable, cozy restaurant had some terrific home-style pierogi as well. However, not all of the restaurants were traditional, even the ones that offered traditional Polish dishes. One example was Pierogarnia Mandu in Gdansk, which is known for its wide variety of pierogi. But don't look for a plain potato or kraut pierogi. The fillings ranged from wild boar meat to duck to tofu to chocolate to strawberry. In addition, there was a selection of deep-fried and baked dumplings, all very good. I really can't write about all of the amazing restaurants we ate at because there were so many. That's due in part to Andy and Wanda knowing the best places to dine. All the prices for food were reasonable as well. However, I have to make mention of our breakfasts. Chopin Tours arranged for buffet breakfasts in each of the hotels we stayed at. All of them were great, but the one at the Sofitel Victoria Hotel in Warsaw was amazing. The buffet included made-to-order omelets, eggs, fresh pastries, artisan cheeses, fresh juices, and seasonal fruit. Maybe it's me, but the fruit in Poland seems to taste fresher and more flavorful. The buffet also had Polish specialties like pierogi, kielbasa, and kiska. If you're not familiar, kiska, also known as kazanka, is a sausage made from pork meat, barley, or buckwheat, and pig's blood. I never liked it growing up, but it sure tasted good in Warsaw. My experience with food in Poland drove home the fact that it's a modern and diverse country. You can still find many of the traditional dishes most Polish Americans are familiar with, but Poles' tastes go beyond pierogi and czernica. Also, Poland is a large and diverse country, and a food that is popular in one region might be hard to find in another. It's hard to believe that 40 years ago, Poles were waiting in bread lines. Today, the abundance is remarkable. Next, to the villages of my ancestors. Continuing with the July 2nd Am-Pol Eagle from Perspectives column, A Pleasant St. John's Eve Celebration by David Franzik. Observing Polish traditions. The brief idyllic days of summer are when Polonia can partake of events celebrating Polish tradition, heritage, and culture, often rooted in the Roman Catholic faith. The Am-Pol Eagle reported on the annual Corpus Christi procession in June, commemorated by the East Side family of churches and taking place at Corpus Christi and St. Stanislaus Church, the mother parish of Polonia. I showed my wife, Anne Marie, one of the photographs taken by the Am-Pol Eagle photographer Peter Sloan, showing her walking with the faithful from altar to altar on the east side streets between the churches. Anne Marie's father, Anthony Wesolowski, and his family belonged to St. Stan's, and her dad's name is listed on a plaque in the church vestibule, showing the roster of the church's young men who joined the American Armed Forces to serve in the Second World War. St. John's Eve at Mickey's. A very old Polish tradition, tracing its roots back to pre-Christian times over 1,000 years ago, is the celebration of St. John's Eve, held on the summer solstice night of June 23rd and 24th. The commemoration, which blends ancient Slavic pagan rituals with emerging Christian traditions, was held last month at the Adam Mickiewicz Library and Dramatic Circle on Fillmore Avenue. It was a meaningful ceremony presided over by the Reverend Cole Webster, pastor of St. Stanislaus Church. Father Cole explained that St. John's Eve commemorates John the Baptist's baptism of Jesus, heralding the onset of his mission of spreading the new faith. In Poland, St. John's Eve is an important event with bonfires along the Wisła River, while maidens donning pure white dresses throw wreaths of flowers into the water. A clear bowl of water surrounded by lit candles commemorated the ceremony at the Adam Mickiewicz Hall, while club president Ania Bach, dressed in a commemorative white dress, placed flowers in the bowl of water blessed by Father Webster. A ceremony, he explained, illustrates the subsuming of ancient paganism into the new Christian faith. Following the conclusion of the ceremony, the gathering enjoyed open-faced kanapki sandwiches prepared by the Euro Deli and authentic imported Polish beverages served at the bar. It was good, as always, to catch up with and talk to club members, Polonia activists, and participants at the evening's proceedings. Chatting with the Servacki family. One of the attendees at the evening's event was a smiling young gentleman I didn't initially recognize. When I asked Anelia his identification, she said he was Tom Serwacki, also known as Captain Tom, lead singer of the popular polka and folk group Captain Tom and the Hooligans. Of course, I knew who he was and heard him perform many times. I've spoken to him before and told him how much I enjoyed his music, but didn't recognize him because he wasn't wearing his signature nautical shirt and sea captain's hat. Tom was celebrating his 25th birthday that night, and he was accompanied by his talented family, who also perform in the band, including Tom's dad, Dave Serwacki, and sister Diana Serwacki, who also sings in the band and was clad in Polish costume, and Christian Serwacki. I initially didn't make the connection, but Tom is the grandson of the very well-known East Side Polonia activist Ed Serwacki, who passed away in 2019 at age 89. I knew Ed long before I knew any other Serwacki family members, and I worked with him for at least 20 years on numerous worthy Polish East Side activities and parades in my capacity as Fillmore District Council member in the 1980s and beyond. Ed was a dynamo, very active in Polish American, veteran, and political affairs. He was the last commander of the General Kazimierz Pulaski Veterans Post on Fillmore Avenue, as well as Am-Pol Eagle Citizen of the Year as an individual in organizations. He also worked for the Buffalo Sewer Authority and was involved in Democratic Party politics. Ed's son, Dave, talked about his family's journey from Poland over 100 years ago to Buffalo, detailing many interesting anecdotes. One of his relatives was the redoubtable Stan Zagora, a good friend who I worked with when he was chairman of the Erie County Legislature. Other relatives owned and operated the Modern Auto Store, which I frequented on Broadway across from the street from Ruda's record store. Chatting with friends at St. John's Eve. In addition to exchanging pleasantries with Father Webster, other attendees at the St. John's Eve celebration I had a chance to chat with or see were Polish Arts Club of Buffalo President Robert Bob Frankowiak, who rarely misses showing up at events in Polonia, Adam Mikiewicz, board member Lisa Lewandowski-Stoll and her husband George Stoll. Lisa wore a wreath of flowers reflecting Polish tradition. Kelly and Ken Rizdewski, DJ Red and White Greg Dowacki, and Augustina, Alexandra, and Alfred Bachmont. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Am-Pol Eagle on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Continuing with the July 2nd Am-Pol Eagle, the guest columnist. A Few Thoughts for America 250 by Martin Ederer. As the United States celebrates its 250th anniversary as an independent nation, perhaps a few historical observations are appropriate. 1. There was a long and complicated history of peoples in our part of the world before the Europeans landed here. Some, especially in Central and South America, built advanced civilizations. All of them everywhere had their own political organization and complex diplomacy. Even after the Europeans landed, the indigenous peoples engaged in complex diplomacy with the new arrivals and took sides based on their own self-interests. It is something of a disservice to portray our indigenous peoples only as victims, even if for most of them that was the end result. As well, think of how much know-how we all missed out on because of dismissive European attitudes towards peoples who knew this part of the world best. 2. Before Columbus, there were the Vikings in the 900s. Nordic sagas give us some glimpses into Viking relationships with people they encountered in the Canadian Maritimes and the northern Atlantic coast of what is now the United States. Already, they weren't getting along. 3. Although Christopher Columbus got a national holiday in the United States, he never landed in any territory that is part of the United States. He got his holiday for a few other reasons. First, his quote-unquote discovery of America was the one that stuck and initiated ongoing and intensive European activity in and emigration to the New World. In short, what he did, love him or hate him, and there is a case to be made both ways, fundamentally transformed the world forever. Second, he got a national holiday in the United States because Italian immigrants who got dismissed as inferior and, in some places, faced lynching for not being white enough, wanted to remind white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that they were only here and in charge because an Italian had landed here first. Number 4. Apropos to point 3 above, some thoughts on dates and how we use them. We consider July 4th, 1776, the birthday of the United States. This was the official rollout date of the Declaration of Independence. Date geeks are well aware, however, that by July 4th, 1776, the American Revolution had been raging for more than a year. Congress had already declared the 13 colonies free of British rule on July 2nd, 1776. Since the United States was a creation of British colonists, the other important birthday for the United States is May 4th, 1607. The establishment of Jamestown marked the first successful permanent British colonial venture in North America. The takeaway? There is a 169-year prehistory to our 250th anniversary this year. If we take the Columbus 1492 discovery date into account, there is a 284-year prehistory. That comes with a corollary that the first permanent European settlements in what is now the United States were Spanish. St. Augustine, Florida, 1585, and west of the Mississippi, Santa Fe, New Mexico, 1610. If you have never read the entire Declaration of Independence, you should. The part that we like to quote that expresses high political ideals only constitutes the first 8 or 9 lines. The rest is a list of grievances against King George III of Great Britain. One of my colleagues describes it as the best breakup letter ever. What becomes clear is that British subjects in the colonies held what they should not have been treated as colonials. They expected the same rights that Englishmen back home enjoyed, especially some consultation if the Crown demanded taxes from them, a fundamental right already expressed in some way in the Magna Carta of 1215. The other fun factoid is that for many Brits, George III came to be viewed as a welcome change from his haughty predecessors. The American view is obviously very different. Isn't it funny how politics never really changes? 6. It is sometimes important to remind ourselves that as important as a baseline national narrative is, there are numerous side stories and smaller yet interesting stories hiding out behind the bigger narrative that we really all should master only as a starting point. In the angry either-or debates that often dominate political invective about teaching American history, a practical and honest approach should dominate. There's room for all the stories, but not always the time to tell them all. That's when some sensible decisions become important. 7. We need to remember that the history of the United States has always displayed conflicts between our high ideals and shortfalls in implementing them in the real world. The United States has always been a work in progress, and every nation, if it is really being honest, ends up having cringe-worthy pages in its history. People make up nations, and we know how we all are, so why the surprise? For America, there's much to be proud of and much that admits of improvement. For example, how do we reconcile freedom from the British only to perpetuate slavery in the new nation? Or, for a long time, the only people who had voting privileges, note the word choice, were landowners. Only people who only owned an actual piece of the United States were allowed to vote, a fundamental aspect of how a republic was expected to function at our beginnings. Consider as well that less than 100 years in, the United States faced collapse twice. The first occasioned a new constitution. The second, the Civil War, threatened to tear the country in half for good. That was only 85 years in. It was only after the Civil War, starting in the North, that Americans began to say the United States is rather than the United States are. How telling is that? 8. I don't seem to recall as much political drama surrounding plans for our national bicentennial celebrations in 1976 as there is now for our 250th. There certainly could have been. We were just coming off the Watergate scandal and a presidential resignation, a fuel crisis, a growing economic mess, and a disastrous outcome to the Vietnam War. In that spirit, maybe we should remind ourselves about the rocky relationship between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and learn from it. Founding fathers both, they were present at the creation of the United States as signers of the Declaration of Independence. Both also played major roles in reshaping the U.S. Constitution in 1787. Up until Jefferson became president in 1801, the two men were good friends. Then they became enemies. Jefferson blamed Adams' last-minute appointments of Jefferson enemies as he left the presidency to Jefferson. After Jefferson's terms as president, they reconciled and renewed their friendship. It was clear that despite all, they respected one another and valued their friendship as human beings. Both died on July 4th, 1826. Perhaps the best assignment for our 250th is for all of us to take time out from our political acrimony to remind ourselves about ideals that we do share as Americans instead of the differences. They exist. They shouldn't be ignored amidst the cacophony and drama. To use an expression from the Yiddish language, let's each one of us concentrate on being a mensch. Let's turn the decibels down, be more curious than furious, learn more than we speak, have some friendly yet honest discussions, and give our overused, one-sided invective a vacation. Happy 4th of July to all of us. Continuing with the Am-Pol Eagle for July 2nd. This week in the History of Buffalo's Polonia by Carl L. Bucky. The following is a list of events that occurred during the week of July 2nd to July 8th. July 2nd, 1893. 5,000 copies of a Polish translation of the Declaration of Independence are disseminated to persons attending Mass at St. Stanislaus Church in Buffalo. This distribution fulfilled a project financed by John J. McBride to release copies of the Declaration in 4 languages: English, German, Italian, and Polish. July 2nd, 1945, Monsignor Peter Adamski becomes the 3rd pastor of St. Stanislaus Church in Buffalo. July 3rd, 1844. Birthday of Father John Pitas, the founding pastor of St. Stanislaus Church in Buffalo. July 3rd, 1887, St. Stanislaus and St. Adalbert parishes held a joint parade as a demonstration of unity within Buffalo's Polish community. July 4th, 1831, future President Millard Fillmore attends the first reported expression of support in Western New York for the cause of Polish freedom. At an Independence Day luncheon, the program made reference to the Polish uprising of 1830-31 through its recitation of the following hope: "May victory crown the efforts of the Poles for the holy cause of liberty." July 4th, 1871, members of the St. Stanislaus Society march in Buffalo's official Independence Day parade. This marked the first report of community activity by an organization of Polonia in Western New York. The St. Stanislaus Society would eventually promote the founding of St. Stanislaus Parish in Buffalo. July 4th, 1917. Thousands of Poles attend a rally at what was then known as Humboldt Park to express loyalty to America. United States Senator James W. Wadsworth, Jr. delivered the keynote address. Under the direction of Leon Olszewski, a mixed chorus of 500 singers presented patriotic songs of both the United States and Poland. July 4th, 1920, public celebrations are held in Buffalo's Broadway Market and on Ridge Road in Lackawanna to mark the successful conclusion of a campaign to sell Polish Liberty bonds. Residents of Western New York purchased more than $830,000 of these bonds to support operations of the new Polish government. And July 8, 1881, fire destroys barns at stockyards located on Fillmore Avenue, about 2 blocks from St. Stanislaus Church in Buffalo. Causing the deaths of 315 cattle, this fire disrupted a major center of commercial activity for the area. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Am-Pol Eagle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing with the Am-Pol Eagle for July 2nd. Polonia's calendar. July 24th, 25th, and 26th, Polish-American Arts Festival, Cheektowaga Town Park. Polish food and beverage, music, crafts, dance groups, exhibits, lectures, demonstrations, and more. Free admission. Tuesday, August 4th, Buffalo Bison's Polish Festival Night. Pre-game club level party, 5:30 p.m. with live music, great Polish food, specials, and more. Bison's Leadership Award presentation to Tom and Paula Golemkowski of Happy Swallow. Polish American of the Year Award presentation to Mary Lou Rylbeck. Post-game fireworks. Saturday, August 8th. Derek Kazarowski Memorial College Scholarship Fundraiser, Depew Polish Falcons, 6:30 p.m. For tickets or information, contact Jim Kazarowski at jejkaz@yahoo.com or 716-864-4642. Sunday, August 23rd, all Polish composer concert by the Amherst Chamber Orchestra, St. Stanislaus Church, 389 Peckham Street, Buffalo, 2:30 p.m. Free will offering. Garden party following the concert at the former convent, Wilson Street entrance. For garden party tickets and reservations, call 716-876-8108, extension 133. Thursday, September 10th, Farewell to Summer Fundraiser, Clucks Grove and Banquet Hall. Saturday, September 26th, St. Adalbert's Basilica 140th Anniversary Dinner at Kisbeck's Banquet, Sloan, New York. Additional information to follow. Sunday, September 27th, Mass to celebrate St. Adalbert Basilica 140th Anniversary. Time to be arranged. Sunday, October 11th, Chopin Singing Society 127th Anniversary Concert, St. Stanislaus Church, Buffalo, 2:30 p.m. Ticket information to be arranged. Friday, October 16th, Free Educators Conference, Ambassadors of Remembrance, Building a Framework for Teaching the Holocaust and Nazi-Era Persecution. For information and registrations, contact Regina Hanchak, 716-857-0331, or R.J. Hanchak, Hanchak, @gmail.com. Sunday, October 25th, Polish Remembrance Day, honoring St. Maximilian Kolbe, martyr of Auschwitz, and the Poles who suffered in World War II. Noon Mass, St. Stanislaus Church, Buffalo. Reception to follow in Church Social Center with entertainment. Theme, Those Who Saved Others, a poster exhibit. Whoever saves a single life saves the entire world. Mishnah available for viewing. For information, contact Regina Hanchuk at 716-857-0331. Send us your Polish-American event information. Email editor at ampoleagle.com with the who, what, where, and when of your Pol-Am event for Polonia's calendar. Continuing with the July 2nd Am-Pol Eagle, Polonia's Gardens. A Garden with Balance and Symmetry by Renia Senko-Hanchuk. I truly enjoy visiting Polonia's gardens. Each is a varied assembly of plants, shrubs, and trees, sculpted as a personal reflection of the gardener. Each garden has its own personality. Paul Wisniewski is a retired senior social welfare evaluator. He told me that working many years in the county position reinforced his attention to detail, organization, and patience. Paul's garden resonated with his traits. There was symmetry and balance throughout. Conscientious detail was incorporated in the planting. It takes a sensitive and thoughtful person to work in social services. Again, I saw the same characteristics in Paul's gardening. He had a story for each plant, where it came from, who planted it, and how it weathered the storm. When a wisteria bush was damaged, he carefully provided supports, realigned the trunk, and pruned it back into shape. A good example of Paul's patience is the process he uses to propagate roses. Paul first takes a 12-inch cutting from a rose bush. The cutting needs to have a flower. He dips it in water, then dips it into root powder, available at all garden centers. He plants it 6 to 8 inches deep in a protected spot and covers it with a wide-mouthed glass jar. In the spring, sprouting leaves usually occur. Thank you, Paul, for sharing your special place with our readers. Continuing with the Am-Pol Eagle for July 2nd, remembering Haym Salomon at America's 250th. As Americans commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, familiar images dominate the celebration. The signing in Independence Hall, George Washington crossing the Delaware, and the victories that secured a nation's birth. Less visible is the man who helped ensure those moments could happen at all. His name was Haym Salomon, a Jewish immigrant, financier, and patriot whose extraordinary efforts to raise and manage money for the revolutionary cause helped sustain an army and a government that repeatedly found themselves on the brink of financial collapse. Though history has often relegated him to the footnotes of the revolution, scholars agree that Salomon played an indispensable role in keeping the dream of American independence alive. The revolution wasn't won by courage alone, historians frequently note. It also required credit. That was a commodity in desperately short supply. By the late 1770s, the Continental Congress was nearly bankrupt. Without the constitutional authority to levy taxes, it depended on loans from France and the Netherlands, contributions from the states, and increasingly worthless paper currency. Soldiers often went unpaid. Suppliers refused to extend additional credit. Even after significant military victories, the American cause was in constant danger of financial failure. Into that crisis stepped Salomon. Born in Leszno, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth around 1740, Salomon traveled in Western Europe, acquiring a knowledge of finance and fluency in some of the languages of the day. He returned to Poland in 1770, but left for England 2 years later in the wake of the first partition of Poland. In 1775, he left for New York City. Fluent in several languages and skilled in currency exchange, he quickly established himself as a successful broker. When the American colonies declared independence in 1776, Solomon cast his lot with the Patriots. The decision nearly cost him his life. During the British occupation of New York, Solomon was arrested on suspicion of espionage. British authorities imprisoned him, but recognizing his linguistic abilities, they employed him as an interpreter for German Hessian soldiers serving alongside British forces. Historical accounts suggest that Solomon quietly encouraged many Hessians to desert the British ranks before eventually escaping himself to Philadelphia in 1781. There, his greatest service to the Revolution began. Philadelphia had become the nation's financial center, and Solomon's reputation as a trustworthy broker quickly attracted the attention of Robert Morris, superintendent of finance and the man charged with rescuing the fledgling nation's economy. Working with Morris, Solomon converted foreign loans into usable currency, marketed government securities, arranged private financing, and secured desperately needed funds for Congress. His office became one of the financial engines of the Revolution. Perhaps just as important, Solomon routinely extended personal credit to government officials whose own finances had been exhausted by years of war. Members of Congress borrowed money from him to cover travel expenses, lodgings, and the basic living costs while conducting nation's business. His generosity came at enormous personal cost. Unlike wartime speculators who emerged wealthy, Solomon repeatedly advanced funds that were never fully repaid. When he died in January 1785 at only 44 years old, his estate was burdened by debts and outstanding government obligations. His widow, Rachel, and their children spent years petitioning for reimbursement, but much of what Solomon had sacrificed was never recovered. As one of the most prominent Jewish supporters of American independence, Solomon represented the diverse coalition that built the United States. Today, statues, schools, and historical markers honor Solomon's memory, but he remains far less familiar than many of the founders whose work he quietly enabled. As the nation reflects its 250 years of independence, historians are paying renewed attention to people whose contributions unfolded behind the scenes in counting houses instead of battlefields, in ledgers instead of legislative chambers. The Declaration of Independence proclaimed the ideals that launched a revolution. Men like George Washington fought to secure them. Chaim Solomon helped make sure the revolution could afford to continue. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 2nd issue of the Am-Pol Eagle. We read from the Am-Pol Eagle every Saturday at 3 p.m. Your reader has been Patricia. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the Island Dispatch. Following that, at 5 o'clock is the Lockport Union Southern Journal. And at 6 o'clock, we have the Jamestown Post-Journal. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Zero, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability